My own son booked me a hotel room so his in-laws could feel comfortable at his wedding weekend, and I smiled like it didn't shatter something in me. What he didn't know was that the paperwork in my name had already been signed, sealed, and waiting for the right moment to be used. Tell me where you're listening from, and if you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, drop "I relate" in the comments. And stay with me, because the way this ended wasn't loud, it was final. The first time he said it out loud, it sounded almost reasonable, the way betrayal always does when it's wearing good manners. We were in his kitchen, the one I helped him furnish when he moved into the nicer neighborhood, and he kept his eyes on the coffee machine like he couldn't look me in the face and still say what he was about to say. He told me his in-laws were traditional, that they valued appearances, that they weren't used to small spaces, and that it would be better if I stayed at a hotel for the weekend so everyone could relax. He called it a solution, like I was a scheduling conflict instead of his mother. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and tell me he was joking. But he just kept talking, explaining how the hotel was nice, how he'd already paid for it, how I could rest, how it would be quieter for me anyway. He said all of it with that careful tone people use when they're trying to make you accept something you never would have chosen for yourself. And the worst part was how practiced it sounded, like he'd rehearsed it with someone else first. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't even ask why his wife's family needed comfort more than his mother needed respect. I just nodded slowly and said, "If that's what you think is best." Because that's what mothers do when they're still trying to protect the version of their child they remember, even when the person standing in front of them feels like a stranger wearing their face. The hotel was 15 minutes from the venue, all glass and marble, the kind of place that smells like expensive perfume and silence. The receptionist smiled too brightly, like she could tell I didn't belong to the world that checked in without hesitation. My son had booked the room under my name, and when she handed me the key card, she said, "Everything is already arranged, Ms. Hart." Hearing my name spoken like that, crisp and official, hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. Up in the room, I set my bag down and stood by the window, looking at the city lights spread out like a promise that never included me. My phone buzzed with a message from my son. A quick one. No warmth, no guilt, just logistics. "We'll see you at the ceremony tomorrow. The hotel shuttle runs every 30 minutes. As if this was normal. As if I was a guest he'd booked, not the woman who raised him. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle around me. And in that quiet, the truth I'd been holding back for months finally felt heavy enough to place on the table. Because this wasn't just about a hotel room. It was about how easily he'd moved me out of the center of his life, how quickly he'd learned to treat me like an inconvenience, and how confidently he did it when the right people were watching. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and stared at my reflection while the water ran. My face looked calm, but my eyes didn't. My eyes looked like someone who had done too much for too long and finally understood that love without boundaries becomes permission for cruelty. I shut the tap off, picked up my phone, and scrolled to a contact I hadn't touched in weeks. The name on the screen was there like a door I'd been afraid to open. And I realized something with a strange kind of peace. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a celebration. Tomorrow was going to be a reckoning. The next morning, the hotel shuttle dropped me at the venue like I was arriving for someone else's event, because in a way, I was. The place was breathtaking in that cold, expensive way, white florals everywhere, valet lines full of black cars, staff moving like they'd been trained to disappear. I smoothed the front of my dress and reminded myself to breathe, then stepped inside with my head high, even though my stomach felt tight enough to snap. His in-laws were easy to spot. They stood near the entrance like they owned the air, greeting people with wide smiles that didn't reach their eyes. His mother-in-law scanned the room the way a manager scans employees, checking who was dressed correctly, who was important, who belonged. When she noticed me, her smile flickered for half a second, then returned, sharper and more controlled. She kissed the air near my cheek, introduced me to someone as the groom's mother, and the way she said it made it sound like a footnote. I looked around for my son, expecting at least a moment, at least a hug, at least something human. Instead, I saw him across the room log. Hing with her family, shoulders relaxed, face bright, the version of him that used to belong to me now performing for them like he'd been practicing for years. When his eyes finally found mine, he didn't walk over. He lifted his chin once in a quick little nod, like we were coworkers who'd already discussed the plan. They placed me where they wanted me. Not front row, not near the family photos, not anywhere that would confuse anyone about my importance. A polite coordinator guided me to my seat with a smile that felt rehearsed, and I sat down quietly while the people around me leaned together, whispering softly, glancing at my dress, my hands, my posture. No one said anything outright, but I felt it anyway. The judgment, the sorting. When the ceremony began, everyone stood, and I stood too, watching my son at the altar. He looked perfect, calm, proud, as if the world had never asked him to choose between status and loyalty. When his bride appeared, the room sighed, and the moment felt like it belonged to a movie. But I couldn't stop noticing how his mother-in-law watched him, not like a proud parent, but like someone checking the lock after closing a door. After the vows, the reception moved fast, like the day was designed to sweep people along before they could think too hard. Music, champagne, cameras flashing, staff offering trays of food that cost more than my first month's rent back when I was building my life from scratch. I was guided again, this time to a table so far from the head table I could barely hear the speeches without turning my head. That's when I understood the real point of the hotel room. They didn't just want me out of the way. They wanted me out of the picture. Then the microphone started making its rounds for toasts, and my son's mother-in-law stood up, smooth as silk, taking it like she'd been waiting for her moment. Her voice carried through the room with practiced charm, and people leaned in because they could tell she knew how to make a room love her. She started sweet, compliments, gratitude, a little laugh here, a little pause there, and then she turned her eyes toward me, still smiling, and I felt something shift like a blade sliding out of a sleeve. She told a story about family, about backgrounds, about how her daughter had married for love, not for comfort, and how some people needed time to adjust to higher standards. The room chuckled in the places she wanted them to chuckle. My son chuckled too, not loudly, not cruelly, worse than that, politely. Then she said my name. And in that second, every conversation near my table faded, and I knew exactly what she was about to do. I kept my face still and my hands calm on the tablecloth, because if I gave her even one crack of emotion, she'd drive her whole speech right through it. She lifted her glass, still smiling, and aimed the next line straight at me. For a heartbeat, I considered standing up and walking out right then, not because I was scared, but because I could feel the whole room turning into a stage and I refused to be the entertainment. But my body stayed still, almost calm in a way that surprised even me. I let her finish the thought, let the laughter land where she wanted it to land, and I watched my son's face while everyone else watched mine. He didn't look confused, he didn't look protective. He looked like a man trying not to lose status in front of people he was desperate to impress. His jaw was tight, his eyes flicked away from me, and that tiny movement told me everything. He wasn't going to stop her. He wasn't going to save me. He had already chosen the side that clapped. The mother-in-law kept going, adding a few more lines that sounded like jokes but carried the kind of meaning that never leaves your skin. She spoke about women who cling, about mothers who don't know their place, about how it was healthy to create distance from people who bring old energy into a new life. She didn't mention me directly again because she didn't have to. She'd already pointed the spotlight, and now she was enjoying how quietly I sat under it. When the toast ended, applause rose up, not thunderous but enough to make my stomach turn. The band picked up again as if nothing had happened, as if cruelty was just another part of the evening's program. People went back to chewing and sipping and smiling. A few guests glanced at me the way you glance at a car wreck you don't want to admit you slowed down for. No one came over. No one asked if I was okay, not even my son. I stood up anyway, smooth and controlled, because I needed air and because I wanted them to see that I could move through their room without shrinking. I walked toward the edge of the ballroom, past the soft candlelight and the flower walls, past the tables where everyone suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Every step felt heavy, but my posture stayed straight. That was the only thing I had left in that moment, how I carried myself. Near service corridor, I heard my son's voice behind me, low and sharp. He didn't call my name like a son, he called it like a problem. He told me to not ruin the night. He told me to be mature. He told me that his new family was sensitive and that I needed to understand the optics. The words were clean, educated, polite, and somehow they cut deeper than anything shouted. I looked at him and tried to find even a trace of the boy who used to run to the door when I came home tired. Instead, I saw a man who was ashamed of where he came from. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't plead my case like I was on trial. I just nodded once, like I heard him, like I accepted the information, and I turned away. That calmness irritated him more than tears would have. He wanted emotion so he could label it, dismiss it, tell himself he was right. I gave him nothing. In the hallway outside the ballroom, the air was cooler and quieter. The sound of the party turned muffled, like it was behind a wall of cotton. I reached the end of the corridor near a small service station where staff had set down extra trays. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, like my body was holding back something it didn't want to hold anymore. And that's when she appeared again. Not from the head table, not from the stage. From the side, like she'd been waiting for the right angle, the right moment, the right lack of witnesses who might interrupt. Her heels clicked softly, controlled, confident. She didn't look drunk or impulsive. She looked deliberate. Her smile was gone now. Up close, her eyes were flat. She didn't speak right away. She just looked me up and down like I was an object that had failed inspection. Then she leaned toward a nearby tray, wrapped her fingers around a bowl a waiter had set down, and lifted it slowly, almost casually, as if she was simply deciding between options. The steam rising from the surface told me it was hot. For a split second, I thought she wouldn't, not because she was kind, but because she cared about appearances. Then I realized that was exactly why she would, because she believed nobody would challenge her, because she believed the room would protect her, because she believed my son would protect her. She held the bowl in both hands, eyes locked on mine, and her voice dropped into something quiet and cruel. "This is what you deserve." And then she swung. The heat hit first, sharp and immediate, like my skin had been turned into a target. Thick soup slid down my face and into my collar, soaking the front of my dress, clinging to me as if humiliation had weight. The sting in my eyes made the lights blur, but I didn't stumble. I didn't scream. I didn't give her the sound she wanted. For a second, the hallway went dead quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then the noise rushed in from the ballroom as people noticed something was wrong. Footsteps, gasps, someone saying my name like they couldn't believe it. A staff member appeared with a towel in their hands, frozen halfway between helping and not wanting to get involved. I could feel every gaze locking onto me, not as a person, but as a moment. She stood there watching me like she'd just won a private war. I blinked through the burn, slow and controlled, and lifted my chin. The soup dripped from my jawline onto the floor in heavy drops. I reached for the nearest linen napkin on the service station with 2 fingers, careful, almost gentle, and dabbed my face the way a woman fixes lipstick before a meeting. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed even. If my dignity was the only thing still mine, nobody was taking it for free. When my son pushed through the gathering crowd, I expected at least confusion. At least a question. Even anger, if only because someone had made a scene. But he didn't ask what happened. He looked at me as if I'd caused it, as if the mess on my face was proof of something I'd done wrong simply by existing too close to his new life. And then he said it. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough for everyone to hear. "She's right, Mama." That sentence landed harder than the soup. It wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the ease of it. The way he said it, like he'd been waiting for permission to stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as an inconvenience. The mother-in-law's expression softened into satisfaction, like she'd just been publicly validated. People in the hallway looked away, suddenly busy, suddenly polite, suddenly afraid of being caught choosing a side. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God," like the problem was the ugliness of it, not the cruelty. I turned my head slightly and looked at my son one last time, not with rage, not with begging, but with a quiet kind of recognition. This was who he was now. Whatever had happened inside him, whatever he'd traded to stand in this family's light, it had cost him the part that used to be mine. I stepped around them and walked back into the ballroom. Music had stopped. The entire room was facing the entrance. Hundreds of eyes, phones lifted, people pretending they weren't recording while recording anyway. The bride stood near the head table, frozen, her mouth open like she didn't know whether to cry or defend her mother. The father-in-law sat stiff, looking straight ahead as if denial was a strategy. I walked through the center like I belonged there. The soup was still on me, my face still stung. My chest felt tight, but my feet didn't hesitate. I reached my table, picked up my clutch, and turned toward the exit without a single rush step. Behind me, I could hear whispers starting to spread like smoke. At the doors, I paused. Not to look back at them, but to reach into my clutch and pull out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact I'd saved weeks ago, the one I'd told myself I might never need, the one that felt like insurance and guilt at the same time. I pressed call. When the line picked up, I didn't explain. I didn't cry. I did narrate what happened as if I needed to be believed. I only said 3 words, calm as a verdict. It's time. Then I hung up, opened the doors, and walked out into the night air like the story had already changed direction. Outside, the night air should have felt cold, but my skin was still burning, so everything felt warm and unreal. I stood under the canopy lights at the entrance, hearing the muffled music restart behind the glass as if nothing had happened. Cars rolled in and out. Valet staff moved quickly, trained not to notice pain that didn't come with a tip. I watched my reflection in the dark window for half a second and barely recognized the woman staring back, not because of the mess on her face, but because her eyes looked finished with begging. I got into my car and told the driver to take me home, but I didn't feel like I was going home. Home was a place where you were wanted. I was just going somewhere quiet enough to think. The soup smell followed me, spicy and thick, clinging to my hair and fabric like a reminder that I'd been marked. My phone didn't ring right away, that was the point. The call wasn't a scream for help, it was a signal, something already set in motion. At home, I didn't collapse. I didn't sit on the edge of the bed and replay the scene like a broken video. I moved on pure control, the kind you learn when you've spent years swallowing your feelings so other people can stay comfortable. I stepped into the shower fully dressed for a moment, letting the water hit the stained fabric, then peeled everything off piece by piece and dropped it into the tub like it didn't deserve a hanger. I washed my face slowly, letting the sting fade. When I looked in the mirror again, the redness was still there, but the shock was gone. What was left wasn't anger, it was clarity. I made coffee because my hands needed something steady to do. The cup warmed my palms. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the city outside my window, still alive, still indifferent. That silence was where the truth finally settled. They thought I would leave and disappear. They thought humiliation was a full stop. An hour later, my phone rang. I didn't jump. I answered like I'd been waiting for a delivery. A calm voice spoke my name, careful and respectful, the way people speak when they know they're dealing with someone who doesn't bluff. The person on the other end didn't ask if I was okay. They asked one simple thing instead, the thing that mattered now. Are you ready? I looked down at the coffee in my hands, then out the window at the lights. Ready wasn't an emotion, it was a decision. Yes, I said. The voice didn't waste time after that. They told me they were already on their way to the hotel. Not alone, not quietly. They had lawyers. They had authority. They had documents. They had people who knew exactly what questions to ask and exactly how to make sure nobody could bury the answers later. I listened without interrupting, letting each detail stack up like bricks. A car would pull up at the entrance within minutes. A private room had been arranged. The bride would be separated from her mother first, calmly, gently, before anyone could twist the story. Security would be instructed by the hotel, not by my son's in-laws. No shouting, no chaos, just control. Before the call ended, the voice lowered slightly, as if offering me one last chance to soften. Once this starts, they said, there's no going back. I didn't hesitate. There hasn't been a way back for a long time, I replied. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, not celebrating, not shaking, just breathing like someone who had finally stopped carrying someone else's shame. In my mind, I could already see it. The ballroom full of people who laughed when I was burned, now forced to watch the truth walk in wearing a suit and carrying paperwork. They were going to learn a lesson that night, not about revenge. About consequences. By the time I got back to the St. Regis, the ballroom didn't sound the same. The music was still playing, but it felt thinner, like everyone was listening for something else underneath it. At the entrance, Two unfamiliar men in suits stood near the host stand with the kind of posture you only see on people who don't need to raise their voice to be obeyed. A third person, a woman with a leather folder held tight against her chest, glanced up the second I walked in, then nodded once like we had an appointment. They didn't make me repeat what happened. They didn't ask for drama. They simply guided me down a quiet hallway and into a private room off the side where the air smelled like polished wood and expensive candles. That's where they brought Clementina first. Not to the crowd, not to her mother, to truth. She walked in confused and blotchy-faced, mascara tracked, bouquet missing, veil crooked like the night had tried to shake her loose. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened, and for a second she looked like she wanted to apologize. Then her mouth trembled, and the apology turned into fear because she could feel something bigger than a family argument was happening. The folder opened, pages slid out. Photos, records, dates, transfers, not a speech, not a lecture, evidence placed on a table like it had weight. The woman in the suit spoke calmly, professionally, like she'd done this before. Clementina's hands went to her chest. Her breathing turned shallow. She stared at the pages the way someone stares at a fire they can't put out. And then she made a sound that didn't belong in a wedding venue. A small, broken noise, like her body was trying to reject what her mind couldn't hold. Serafina tried to force her way in minutes later. I heard her before I saw her, that sharp, entitled voice demanding to know where her daughter was, demanding to know who gave anyone permission to pull a bride away. When she pushed into the room, she froze mid-step because the atmosphere wasn't gossip anymore. It was legal. Her face shifted fast. First outrage, then calculation, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She tried to laugh it off, tried to paint it as jealousy, tried to make me the villain again. But she'd been performing for people who wanted to believe her. In that room, nobody needed to believe. They could read. My son arrived right behind her, still in his tux, still wearing the confidence he'd borrowed from that family like it was his own skin. He took one look at the table, and I saw it happen. The blood draining from his face as his brain caught up to what his mouth had been denying for months. He didn't shout at me, he didn't call me dramatic, he didn't say I was ruining anything. He went quiet. That quiet told me everything I needed to know. Clementina didn't scream, she didn't slap anyone, she didn't throw a scene for the crowd to feed on. She just looked at her mother, then at my son, and the betrayal landed so hard her knees seemed to forget their job. Someone caught her before she hit the floor. After that, the night moved quickly. Lawyers stepped out to make calls. The hotel staff shifted into crisis mode with practiced politeness. The head of security stopped taking instructions from Marcus's men and started taking instructions from the people holding credentials. The ballroom doors opened and closed in controlled bursts, pulling key people out, sending others away, sealing off the mess before it could become entertainment. Inside the ballroom, the guests felt it before they understood it. Conversations died. People stood up. Phones came out again, but this time nobody was laughing. Serafina tried one last time to take control in public. She marched back into the ballroom like she was still hosting, like she could talk her way through it with status and volume. But status can't argue with documents, and volume can't drown out a room full of people watching your mask slide off. When the announcement finally hit, it didn't come as a dramatic speech. It came as a simple instruction. The event was over. Guests were asked to leave. And they did. Not because they were polite, because they were afraid to be seen standing too close to a sinking ship. My son followed me out into the corridor like a man waking up in a stranger's life. His voice cracked when he said my name. He didn't have a plan anymore. He didn't have allies anymore. His power was gone, and what was left was just a grown man standing in a hallway, realizing he'd burned the one person who would have still loved him when the lights shut off. He started to speak, but no words came out clean. Every sentence tried to excuse itself. Every apology tried to keep a door open. Behind him, Serafina looked wrecked but not remorseful. Her eyes were frantic, scanning faces, searching for someone to blame, someone to intimidate, someone to control. For the first time, she couldn't find anyone. That's when the begging started. It was Clementina. Begging, she didn't need to. She had finally seen the truth, and the truth is a kind of freedom that doesn't negotiate. It was Serafina, hissing threats that collapsed into pleas the moment she realized she was cornered. It was my son, asking for just one chance. Like chances were a currency he hadn't spent for years. It was people who had laughed earlier suddenly acting like they'd always respected me, hoping proximity could rewrite history. I stood there calm, feeling the sting on my skin fade into something distant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge anymore because the truth had already done what I couldn't do with my hands. I looked at my son and understood something painful and simple. Love doesn't survive without respect. So I gave him the only thing he'd earned from me that night. Nothing. I walked away while they were still talking. And for the first time in a long time, my steps didn't feel heavy.